So it's April 2021, and one of the things that I am doing this month is I want to really create more of an awareness of the cannabis industry, especially in Chicago, because of how much it's grown over the last couple of years. And obviously, I'm having the 420 panel on the business of cannabis with some Chicago business leaders that have done a lot in the industry already. And one of the things that I want to do, kind of that correlates to what I've been doing the rest of this year, is women in business, right? And so right now we're going to do something where this is going to be the first one that I'm doing on women in cannabis. So I am really excited for this first video, and I'm really happy to have Laurie Parfitt join me on this and tell us her story and her perspective on what's going on in cannabis and her experience with it. So Laurie, welcome.
Thank you, Benny. Glad to be here.
Yeah, really glad that we're able to do this. So first, before we get started on the questions that I had, if you want to just tell us your background and kind of your story.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me today. So as Benny said, I'm Laurie Parfitt, and I entered the cannabis industry back in 2019 with Mission Dispensaries. Prior to that, I had about 15 years of experience in consumer products, mainly food and beverage. And a lot of my experience was in category management, marketing, sales strategy, and finance in that industry. And I was really excited to join the cannabis industry in 2019 with Mission Dispensaries, which is a division of Forefront, and utilize the experience that I got in CPG to really benefit the cannabis industry. And so since then, I have moved on, and I have my own consulting practice, and my consulting practice focuses on consumer products and cannabis being the largest part of that, and really trying to help cannabis companies and dispensaries understand their consumers and drive a better experience at retail.
Got it. So how was that transition from going from cannabis to CPG? And I'm curious to know, like, what your thoughts were. Like, were they, especially from like the sales and marketing side, right? Like, from your perspective, how different was it?
More different than I expected. So it's interesting, when you're in consumer products, when you're in food and beverage, all of those products are legal in every state of the union. And so federally accepted, you don't have to worry about, how you're promoting on social media, digitally. You're able to use TV, radio, all of those mediums that are typical for marketers are open to you. What was interesting about the cannabis industry is those are no longer open to you. So
Yes, yeah.
because it's not federally legal, promoting products and promotions on social media or on digital platforms, or even in some states on billboards, is actually very taboo and considered illegal in some cases.
Even in the states where it's legal, it's illegal to advertise on billboards?
In some cases, yes.
Hmm.
And so it's a little bit more attributable to the liquor industry, which I had worked in previously as well. And so in the liquor industry, you have open markets, you have franchise markets, and you have control states. And even within the open markets, where it's in an open market, which Illinois is an open market for liquor, you can choose your distributor. If you don't like your distributor, you can fire them and move to a different distributor. There are other open markets that have other limitations associated with them. And so this industry is very much the same way. It's fragmented, and everything is done on a state-by-state basis. And even states where recreational use is allowed and legal, there are still marketing mediums that you can potentially not use. And so it's all about how those laws are written, how the regulatory compliance is enforced. And you have to be very adept at understanding what those laws and regulations are, so that you don't overstep, because if you do, and even if you don't, you can still get shut down pretty quickly. And unfortunately, getting shut down in the cannabis industry really hurts the movement. And so what I love about cannabis is it's not just an industry, it's truly a movement. And everything you do now and everything that we're putting together, if we don't do it right, it's going to affect the industry 30 years from now. And
Right.
so you have to be very careful about everything you do from a sales and marketing perspective. For example, I knew that on social media, you can't promote products that are cannabis related. And so when I thought about my digital and social campaign for Mission, I really had to think of creatively about how I was going to approach it, because my traditional means of promoting on social, like paid social, boosting, all of that kind of stuff, you cannot do as a cannabis company. The second you boost a post, Facebook will immediately shut you down.
I did not
And
know that.
yeah, and so they
Huh.
have a lot of regulations about what you're allowed to do because it's not federally legal and it affects them. And so what I did with my social media campaign was I really focused on not on product, but on building community and taking some of the shame and stigma away from utilizing cannabis. So when you sit in dispensaries, you hear people not want to give their email address, their phone number, because they're afraid that their friends are going to find out they were there, or their spouse is going to find out they were there. And that's a really sad state of affairs. And it must make those people feel very alone in the world. And so our goal was to really build a community around cannabis and show people that there are others in the world that are like them and are able to manage their symptoms and take their wellness back by utilizing cannabis in a very safe and effective way. But even doing that, you can still get shut down and you get reported by somebody and you lose
How
your
do they shut you
Instagram page.
down? How do they shut you down for just even the community part that you just mentioned?
If someone reports you and there's anything there that they believe is a call to action, is promoting cannabis usage, if there's anything that is accessible to children, even if it's not about selling the product, they can shut you down. Generally speaking, you have to be reported, but it does happen. It doesn't happen on a regular basis, and cannabis companies are dealing with this every single day. I do believe it's getting better as more states are legalizing.
Yeah.
But until we see federal legalization, it's always going to be very tricky to market in this industry. And that's very different from consumer products and food and beverage, where you have all of these levers you can pull. In cannabis, you just don't have that. So you have to be incredibly creative, which is something I really love about the industry, because it's a problem you have to solve. And if you do it effectively, the sky's the limit for you.
No, I think that's what really wanted me to do this, is that I just see a ton of opportunity in cannabis, not just selling the product, but like, for example, what you're doing right now, right? Like that's an opportunity in cannabis, along with like so many Philo, the company that does compliance for cannabis marketing, they just raised 30 million
Yep.
this week. So there's a lot to that. But I feel like I'm not in that cannabis industry, so the more people that I talk to and get to know, the more I learn. And I'm just naturally a very curious person. So that's one of the selfishly, that's one of the reasons why, I wanted to talk to you, is because I want to learn for myself. But in terms of like the companies that are in cannabis, right? Like, so they have all these restrictions right now, and I'm sure the fines are a lot too and the penalties are a lot, but like, how do these companies get a competitive advantage?
So that's a great question, and it's definitely an interesting dynamic in the industry. And I think it depends who you are. If you are a dispensary, or you are a multi-state operator with lots of dispensaries, I think to create a competitive advantage, you can do things one of two ways. One is by creating really compelling brands that consumers identify with and have really great brand strategies. So a real focus on who is that target consumer. How do you position that brand? How do you build up that brand pyramid from your points of parity, your points of differentiation, your brand promise, the consumer response, all the way up through that brand essence? And that brand essence is truly the emotion you want people to feel when they interact with your brand. And so if you can hone that, um, that really can help you create the messaging that you can utilize to really inspire and engage cannabis consumers. Secondly, the other thing that I think cannabis companies can do from a dispensary perspective is create a truly engaging experience at retail. And I do believe that comes from some of that brand strategy. So even if you're not creating brands like a gummy brand or a tincture brand, if you're creating the brand of your dispensaries, so whether it's Mission, whether it's Sunnyside, whether it's Greenhouse, it's really taking that brand essence and getting everybody in your company, everybody who works in a dispensary, to live that brand essence so that it permeates through the customer experience at retail, and that you merchandise your stores. Everything you do in terms of store design, merchandising, education, promotions, all comes from that brand essence, and making sure that people feel safe, supported, and secure when they're in your dispensary, so that they can experience cannabis in the best way possible.
Let's see. So there's all these, and this is just, there's so many restrictions on like the marketing and all that. Like, how does a lack of transparency affect how retailers can sell their product?
So you can't advertise the same way, but you can still create very compelling brands and do certain things at retail that make them very effective for you. And so it's really going back down to like brass tacks and saying, okay, we have that compelling brand strategy. We know we can't be advertising in all of the traditional mediums. So how do we do things at retail to inspire and engage the consumer? How do we create that awareness? And one of the things that I was trying to work on was really the thought of joint business planning with suppliers and cultivators. And what's interesting in the CPG world, this is like something they do every single day. This is always part of the business process. And it's really working together to say, how do we grow together? I'm a dispensary operator, you're a cultivator, processor. How do we grow our businesses together, knowing that we're also, in a lot of cases, competitors? And so it's really saying, okay, like, how do we take these brands? How do we create exclusive offerings? How do we put together educational events? One of the things we did was we created a national engagement calendar. And on that calendar, we had identified key need states, as well as some additional ancillary need states that we were able to align with national holidays. And so we had something like Mood Month, Anxiety Month. And through that, we worked with our cultivator partners to say, okay, we want to create a curated box solution. We believe that if we put 4 or 5 items together, we price it at $100, we can take items that you want to test, items that aren't in the market, exclusive items, and see how they do at retail, and say, this is what you can utilize in order to enhance your mood, or quell your anxiety, or take away some of that pain. And these are the products that we think would be most effective for that. And then we put together an infographic in partnership that talked about all of the different components of that. And then from there, we did in-store events where you bring in your cultivator partner, they're training people, and they help engage with consumers at retail to educate. And so that's something that brands can do. It's really going back to that whole trade marketing philosophy that we have in traditional grocery, mass, drug retail, which is, we found out in consumer products that it didn't really matter how much national advertising you did. What really gets a consumer to pick up a product is a 2 for $4, a 3 for $5, a shelf tag at retail. That's what really captures their attention and gets them to try something new. So it's always worth doing those things literally at retail, at the dispensary level. And the more you do it, the more traction those brands get over time. And then from a dispensary perspective, it's really about making sure consumers know where you are, know how to find you, and know what you stand for in terms of customer experience.
Got it. Okay. So this is it's something I was actually thinking about, because now people are getting more vaccinated, and they're, people are feeling more comfortable. Hopefully we don't have to wait too long until things really open up again. The dispensary scene, right? Like, in your opinion, like, if people are vaccinated, people feel like they want to go out again, like, we'll be going back to outdoor patios being filled, bars being filled for football games, or whatever the case. Like, how do you think it's going to impact, like, the dispensary side and the different distribution outlets for cannabis?
So you mean,
are we going to have packed dispensary, like, where people are sitting down and just, or is it going to be like not like that?
So I think, especially in the near term, and this is not like necessarily a COVID related thing, and need to be vaccinated. There is still not enough dispensaries to satisfy the demand, especially here in Illinois. There's just not enough licenses. It's getting so much better. But it's still going to be, another year or two until we really see the market open up. And so from a dispensary perspective, dispensaries have to be very careful about how they approach this, because the truth is, even in COVID times, people still wanted to come to dispensaries.
Yeah.
It's still all about medication and living your best life and being able to take care of yourself and your own wellness. And so, traditionally before COVID, you'd have a line around the block.
Yeah.
And people would be waiting to come in, and you'd have to check in the vestibule, and then you'd wait in line, you'd get up to the counter, and the goal was to move you in and out as quickly as possible. And so, and when I talk about customer experience at the dispensary level, that can be pretty intimidating for a lot of consumers. So the majority of consumers who come into cannabis dispensaries are sort of that kind of curious consumer. It's that, it's the Chardonnay mom, it's the soccer dad. It's the people who maybe tried cannabis in college, and once they became adults and they had to get jobs and they had to be drug tested, they walked away from it because that was the responsible thing to do. That was the right thing to do. And now that it's coming back around and it's a much more mainstream, they want to re-engage in it. Well, a lot of those consumers don't know what they want anymore. I mean, back when they were in college, it might have just been a dime bag of flour.
Yeah.
Now you've got edibles, you've got tinctures, you've got topicals, you've got vaping technology, you've got waxes and shatters, and how do you use all that?
Right.
And what do I need to satisfy my need states, what I'm trying to solve? And so what's been interesting is when you went to a dispensary, you'd wait in line, then you get into the dispensary, then you'd wait to get up to a bud tender. You'd get up to that bud tender and you'd see that line behind you, and there's pressure there to get out of the dispensary as quickly as possible because there's so many people waiting. And so you end up a lot of times not buying what you need because you're just trying to figure out what it is you want to do. And that bud tender might be phenomenal and might be wonderfully educated, but at the same time, they might just, they might be a new bud tender and not really have the depth of knowledge that you require. And so that experience was, for a lot of people, very intimidating. And so with COVID, and as they were letting people back into dispensaries, one of the things that came out of it was that you could order online and pick up in store, or they did some curbside work for you because of the whole COVID dynamic, which kind of opened things up. But even if you're at home and you're trying to figure out what it is you want, a lot of times you didn't know. And so I think as we move out of this and people are able to come back into dispensaries, I think we will see that slow migration happen again. But I think it'll be incumbent upon retailers, so dispensary retailers, to actually try to create a more educational and engaging experience as consumers come into the dispensary, and find ways to educate them before they get up to that bud tenders.
Got it. So last question.
Okay.
How does it feel to be a woman in cannabis?
That's a great question. It's a really different dynamic. And so, what's interesting about the cannabis industry is it's super nascent. And so it's just really starting to take hold.
What does nascent mean?
It means it's like very new. It's very at the beginning stages.
Okay.
And so, it was an industry that women were really hoping they could really heavily engage in and lead. And, Illinois Women in Cannabis is a great example of that. They are one of the strongest cannabis groups here in Illinois, and they do wonderful events, and they have fantastic leadership. But the truth of the matter is that the cannabis industry is very similar to consumer products and liquor, where it's still owned by sort of all the same people. And so, to be a woman in cannabis, or to be a minority in cannabis, and I really can't speak to the minorities in cannabis, as I am not one, but I would say that if I had to guess from both perspectives, it's not as open as we would have hoped. And so I think with some of the regulations that a lot of these states are coming out with, where there's social equity and a real commitment to help the people and allow the people who have been hurt by the war on drugs actually benefit from the cannabis industry, I'm hoping that we're going to see that shift.
Yeah.
And we're going to see a really different dynamic in cannabis. And I think it's coming. And I think states are making a lot of great strides towards that. And I hope for women and for minorities that we see a tremendous opportunity going forward.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I just think there's so much potential that if this is done right in cannabis, especially in Chicago, but nationally. So I really appreciate your time, Laurie. And obviously I'm posting this on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, are you active on LinkedIn? Is there a better way? Let me know. What is it?
I am active on LinkedIn. If you want to get in touch with me, my profile is open. Please feel free to message me and I will definitely message you back. Any questions anyone has, I'm happy to answer them at any time.
Perfect. And this is officially my first ever, you're number one in this Women in Cannabis series. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here today and getting to share my experience in cannabis.